Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking part on this built-in Klipfolio workshop. My name is Exequiel, and I work with our success team, making sure that our customers are being successful with the platform and really helping you to get the most out of Klipfolio. Today, I'm going to walk you through three major clips that we're going to build together. As you see on the screen, this is the actual dashboard that we're going to be building. And this one has three, as I said, three clips. The very first one is going to be a combination of some filters and some formulas, very simple formulas that are going to help us filter the data that we see on this bar line chart through a day picker using two different user input controls. The second clip that you're going to see right in the middle of the dashboard, it's going to allow us to filter the data just by using filters. So we're not going to be using any formulas. I'm just going to focus on filters, and it's going to be very similar, but instead of having user input control used as a day picker, we're going to be using it with a filter of different items that are going to be selected. And then my graph will react based on the selection that I have. And the last one is going to be a gauge. This one is a sales gauge that uses Salesforce as a data source, and it's going to be a dynamic gauge, which means that any changes that are reflected in Salesforce, those will be also reflected in Klipfolio. As you can see here, this gauge, it's going to be our last clip, and it's going to be made based on only some formulas. There's going to be a little bit more complexity to it, but I feel like this is a great mixture of the three of them. So why don't we just get started? I'm going to go to the right hand side of the screen, and I'm going to press on the plus button here so that we can add a new dashboard. So I have the option to add in something from the dashboard gallery, which is pre-built content that we have, or we can pick something from the dashboard library. Here is where I'm going to be selecting a blank dashboard, and I'm going to be starting this one totally from scratch. So as you can see here, I have no clips. So let's go ahead and add our first clip by selecting on the blue button where it says add a clip. Now it's going to bring me here to the selection of either, again, clips from the gallery that is pre-built content or a custom clip, which is the case for today. Now it's going to bring me to the component palette, which will show me different components that I can use. I'm going to be using the bar line chart today, and I'm going to be using an existing data source that I've already pre-selected for this particular example. So as I said, my data source is coming from Google Analytics. You can see it here on the logo, and I just call it training. So I'm going to select that one. And now I'm in what we call now the clip editor. So things to point out here. For those that are new and that you have never seen the clip editor, let me walk you through it. At the bottom of the screen is where you're going to see all your data sources. I also have the ability to add a new data source. So if I click in there, I can go ahead and take a look at all the other data sources that I could have in my library. On the right hand side, I'm going to have that component palette that I saw at the very beginning when I started building this clip. And you're going to see that I can keep adding more components to my visualization. Right in the middle of the screen is where I'm going to visualize everything that I'm building. And why don't we make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it better? There we go. And then on the left side of the screen, you're going to have the component tree. And here's where I'm going to be manipulating my data as I'm adding the different components. So the first one is going to be, as I said, a bar line chart. So why don't we start by the first thing that I like to do is to rename this clip. And this clip, as I say, we're going to be using is going to be a day picker. So I'm going to rename it to be day picker. Now I'm going to go to the bar line chart, and I'm going to start with the x-axis. So at the bottom, I'm going to select the data tab where I can select the data that I want to use on my x-axis. So the x-axis in this case is going to be using dates. So I'm going to select column A where all my dates are going to be showing up. One thing that I also like to do is to name the component tree in here so that I know exactly where I'm working with. So I'm going to go ahead and add the name date, and you're going to see that it auto-populates in my component tree beside the x-axis. So now that I have all my dates at the bottom, I'm gonna go into properties and I'm gonna make a couple of changes. The first one is that I want my dates to be vertical. And then you can see that they're starting to show a little bit different. The second thing that I want to do here, as you can see, the very first value that I have, it's going to be my column header, which is GA date. So why don't we go ahead and we delete that and we remove it from the x-axis. I can go into my properties and I can add a filter. By adding this filter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be excluding the blank that I'm going to have, which in this case happens to be the column header. I'm going to filter my data and you're going to see that now it has disappeared and now I have a date in there. The second thing that I want to show you is that right now what's happening is we are dropping some labels because we have a very big database. So in this case, I'm going to tell my clip not to drop any labels. And now I'm going to be able to see all the different dates. And I know what you're thinking, it's a little messy and maybe this is not the data that I want to see, but just let's build this together. And then with the date picker, we're going to be able to choose a date range and then the data will be a little bit more visible. So the first thing that I want to do is now add one of my series. And in this case, I'm going to use my users. So I'm going to select column B and I'm going to start seeing some of those bars. Once again, if I go into my properties and I change that to be users, you're going to see that that will change on the component tree as well as you can see it on the legend on the right hand side. So now that I have that selected, the second component that I want to add is going to be my new users. And that is going to be represented with the line across my bars. But as you can see in the component tree, I'm missing that series. So why don't we go ahead and add a new series? On the right hand side, I can select in here and I can add a new series. So I'm going to add it. And the same way I did for my users, I'm going to select column C to have the new users. Now I'm going to move into my properties and I'm going to change this to be new users. Another thing I want to do is, as you can see, this is populating it as different green bars, but we say we're going to do a line. So we're going to go ahead and select the line. So there you have it. So half of my job is already done. So the next step would be to add the date picker that we said that we were going to originally do. So let's go ahead and add that. So I'm going to move to my component palette. And the first thing that I want to do is add that user input control. But I like to keep things organized. So I'm going to add a layout grid first. That way I'll be able to add more than one component side by side. This particular layout grid, by default, you will have 3 columns and 2 rows. But in reality, I just want to have 2 columns and 1 row, so that I have one for my user input control that will have the start date and another one for the end date. So I'm going to go ahead and select the first one and I'm going to place it in here. I'm going to select this one as well. And I'm going to enter it right in the middle, which I always struggle to put in here. So now I just added the second one on my graph. So what I'm going to do now is, as I did before, name them. So I'm going to name this one to be my start date. And I'm going to have my second one to be my end date. And I'm doing that under the properties tab again. So you can see too that in both input user controls, I have values and I have labels. In this case, we're not going to be using that because this is for a drop-down list. So what we need to do is change the control type to be a date picker. And automatically, you're going to see that the labels and the values will disappear. So I'm going to do that for the end date as well. And there you have it. So I have my first user input control, which is going to be the start date. And I'm going to rename it on the component tree as well. So I'm going to have the start date here. And I'm going to do the same for the end date so that I know exactly what those components are and I don't get confused. There you go. So now when I click on my start date, you can see that the calendar will show up and I do the same on the end date. So now the next step, and it's going to be the last step that I need to do, is just link. these two user input controls with my x-axis so that when I select a date, so for example, if I do January 1st to perhaps February 1st, my x-axis will react to those date range and it will change. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create what we call variables. So I'm going to go into my start date and I'm going to create a variable under the properties tab. I can do here new variable and I'm going to call this one start date. So I know what variable I have, and it seems that I've already created one called start date. So maybe for this case, I'm just going to call it start. So I'm going to create that one. And then I'm going to go into the end date and I'm going to create a new variable and I'm going to call it end. And I'm going to create that variable. And I can see that those variables are being used right here. So now what I need to do is I need to connect those variables to my x-axis. But before I do that, I want to introduce a new concept that some of you might be familiar with. The concept is Unix time. So when you take a look at, let's take a look maybe at the x-axis. When you take a look at the x-axis in your properties, you can see that the formatting of your dates, it's coming in as, in this case, is the year, the month, and the day, and the output, it's also the year, the month, and the day. So this is what we call human time because we understand what that means. So if I take a look on my date and I take a look at the first one in here, I understand that this is August 25th, 2017. Computers don't quite understand that. So we really need to change the date to a unique language that the computers will understand. So if I take a look at my user input control, you're going to see that the display format for the input is going to be the same way that I'm doing my x-axis, but the output, it's in what we call Unix time. You're probably wondering, what is Unix time? Unix time is the number of seconds that you have from 1970 to the day that you're selecting, and that will create a very unique number. So what we're going to do now is we need to convert all our dates in our x-axis so that it will talk to our day picker. So our day picker, it's only reading time as Unix time, but our x-axis in our properties, we can take a look that it's not Unix time. So in order to do that, we have a function called date. And this is going to be the first function that I'm going to introduce in this workshop. So by doing that, what I can do is I can just go ahead and enter the date in here. But if I do that, then my entire visualization is going to be in seconds, which I really don't want that. I want to be able to understand the numbers that I have and the dates that I have on my x-axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter something that we call hidden data. Basically what it does, it hides the data, but it will filter the data based on that. So if I go on the right hand side of the screen, I can add in here, I'm going to go first to the bar line chart level, and then I can add hidden data. I can also see it under the properties tab, and I'm going to add a piece of hidden data. And you're going to see it because it has the word data. That's how you know it's hidden. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to call this one Unix time. So now that I have this in Unix time, this tab created, let's go ahead and build that function. So I mentioned that that function is called date. So I'm going to start typing date and the date function will show up. A couple of things I like to call out in here. The first one is going to be the function help, which will literally bring a little window with a breakdown of what the function does, the parameters that it uses, and then a very small example on what it does. So in this one, the date function, as I said, all it does, it will convert the format of the date that you have into Unix time. So let's go ahead and see how that works. So I'm going to use the date and I'm going to select the dates that I want. So that's going to be my column A. Oops. I enter it right in the middle of my function. So let's try it again. There we go. So I have my column A. I need to add a comma. And now add the formatting of how my dates are coming in. And I'm always going to do this in quotations marks, as you can see here on this example. So I'm going to start quotations and I'm going to say the first one is going to be the year. So I'm going to add 4 Y's to represent the year. The second value is going to be the month. So I'm going to have two M's for the month and then two D's for the day. And now when I press enter, my dates have been converted. Let's take a look at that. If I select column A and I evaluate by pressing the little thunder on the side, or if you want a quick shortcut, you can do Alt A, and that will evaluate. So you can see that everything is coming back in human time. So you have August 25th, 2017. So now if I evaluate the day function, this is going to be the results after I apply the formula. I can see that the dates are coming back in seconds. So now I can join this with this, and I can get the two variables to talk to my hidden data. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into the properties panel again, and I'm going to add a filter. And that filter will be added by a condition. If I take a look at the conditions, you're going to see that I need the condition to be greater than my start date, and I don't see that in my breakdown here. The reason why you don't see it, it's because you can see that right now it's setting up as if it was text. I don't want it to be text. I want it to be a number because I now have the number of seconds. So let's go ahead and take a look and do that filter again. And now when I choose my conditions, I do have greater than or equals to. So let's go ahead and we're going to do greater than the start date, which is going to be my variable. So I'm going to press, instead of being text, I want it to be a variable. And we call that variable start. So I'm going to select my start. And now I'm going to add the second variable, which is going to be less than or equals to. And here I'm going to add the end date. I'm going to filter my data, and now my graph should work. So let's take a look at that. If I select January 1st to February 1st, I can see now that my graph is reacting. And I can see it in human times here because I can see February 2nd in this case, February 1st, 2017, but I can also change it in my x-axis, and I can custom made the different types I want my x-axis to be represented by. So in this case, I'm just probably going to choose the month and the date, and I'm going to sort it from oldest to newest. So I have from January 2nd all the way to February 1st. And there you have it. So let's go ahead and save this. And you're going to be able to see now how the user input control changes as well as your graph. I'm going to keep it as date picker. So in my library, it's going to be named under date picker. And now I can see my first clip in here. So once again, let's select some dates. So maybe this time let's do April 1st to, I'm going to use maybe June 1st. And there you have it. So I have my entire graph represented by those dates. So this is, again, it's a date picker using a bar line chart with two user input controls as date pickers. So now we're going to move to the next clip. So the next clip that we're going to be building is going to be very, very similar. We're going to add a custom clip, but this time I'm going to be using a table. And as I said before, I'm going to be using an existing data source. And this time I'm going to be using Google Drive. So I use Google Analytics for the first one. I'm going to be using Google Drive for the second one. So once again, I'm in the clip editor where I can see my visualization in here. And I'm going to start by adding some of the columns that I want to see. So the first one is going to be the state. On column 2, I want to see the city. Column 3 is going to be units. And then the last one is going to be the status of that particular order that we are placing. So let's go ahead and once again, let's keep things organized and let's name everything. So this one is going to be units by state. So that's going to be the title of my clip. And now I can go ahead and start naming all the different column headers for each column. So I have the city on the second one. In this one, I have units. And then the last one is going to be the status. So let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. So now that I have all of them together, now I can start adding my user input control to filter the data based on one condition. So let's go ahead and let's go to the component palette and let's find that user input control component that I'm going to be using. Here I have it. And before, the control type that we use, remember, was a day picker. This time is going to be a drop-down list. And the drop-down list that I'm going to be using is going to be the state. So that when I select the state in here, the state in here will change and my entire table will react to it. But before I do that, I'm noticing here that the column header is still showing on my table. So let's go ahead and filter that. The way we're going to do that, once again, I'm just going to be clicking in one of the columns, and then I can add a filter in the Properties tab, and I'm going to deselect the state, and now I'm going to exclude it. So once I filter it, now the column header has been eliminated. So for my user input control, this one is going to be, we said it's going to be the state, so I'm going to call it state. And you can see it in there. Now, what we need to do is right now, my user input control is empty because I need to select the states. So let's go ahead and under values, we're going to go into the data tab and we're going to select column B that will show me all the different states that I will have in my table. So once again, I'm starting to see the column header. So the same way that we eliminated it in here, we're going to do it in here. I'm going to filter my data. I'm going to look for state. I'm going to select it, exclude it, and filter my data. So now my column header is no longer there. The one thing I'm noticing though is that every single state I have here, it's repeated several times. The reason why is because we haven't grouped our data. So every time we group our data, it'll give me one unique element per item that is being returned. So we can do that simply by going into values, going to those filters, and I will have the group option for me to group my data and to have one unique element per item that's being returned. And now you can see it. So now my visualization is pretty much done. The last thing I need to do is add those variables so that I can connect the two components. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my user input control. And in this case, I'm going to be adding a new variable right here at the bottom. For this variable, maybe we can call it state because that's what we're filtering. And once I created that variable, I need to go into the states column and I'm going to be adding a filter to that. And that filter is going to be based on a condition, and I want to match my condition. So I'm going to match the variable that I have, which in this case was called state. So let's find it right here. And once I find it, I can filter my data. And now you can see that every time I'm changing the state, so let's say, for example, Nevada will auto-populate in my table and it will change. If I do Georgia, you can see how my table is reacting. So the last thing I want to show you here before we save this clip is that we also have the option to have every single state. So in my properties, I have the option to include all data. So by selecting that, as you can see here, I can just include the option all in my breakdown. And when I click on it, I can see every single state that's on my list. So there you have it. So this is building a user input control to a table only using filters. So I'm going to go ahead and save this clip. I'm gonna call it units by state. And now I'm gonna add it to my dashboard. So we're halfway there. So we created our first clip, which was the day picker. We created a clip that it's a user input control using options that you can have in order to pick the data and filter it on the table. Excellent. So now we're going to move to the last clip of this dashboard. Once again, I'm going to add a clip. I'm going to build a custom clip. And this time I'm going to be building a gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and add that gauge component to it. I'm going to be using an existing data source, and this is going to be a dynamic data source. So I just decided to call it dynamic dates, and that will have also that's going to have Salesforce as a data source. I'm going to select it, and now I'm inside the clip editor. So here I'm going to be using only formulas. So what I want to accomplish today is to see how my sales are doing today. So the first thing is to name our gauge, and it's going to be a sales gauge, and it's going to be for today. So how am I doing today? So why don't we add that question to my graph so that I know what I'm talking about. So we can do that with a label. So I'm going to grab a component on the right hand side of the screen, which is going to be a label component. I'm going to add it on top of my gauge, and here in my quotations, as I mentioned before, we're going to write the word, how am I doing today? And now when I press enter, I can see that my title is there. Let's change it a little bit. So if I go into the properties, I can probably use a medium-sized text. I can have it in the middle, and maybe let's add some color to it, and let's make it blue so that it looks a little bit better. So now what we're going to do is work just on this gauge, and we're going to do it by using some of the data that I have right here at the bottom. So for my current value, so the current value is going to be right in the middle, and this is going to tell me how I'm doing today with my sales. So you can see here that I have in column A, I have all my dates, and in column B, I have my revenue. So I'm going to be using those two columns. And what I want to do is I want to select data based on a condition. My condition is that it has to match today's date, and the data that I'm going to be using is going to be my revenue. So for that, we're going to use our select function. So I'm going to start typing select, and I can see that select allows me to select data based on a condition. The data I'm going to be selecting is going to be my revenue. So when I select revenue, I'm going to have it on my formula tab. I'm going to add a comma, and now I'm going to add my condition. I want my condition to be the date equals to today. And today is a function in Klipfolio, which again, if I go into today and I evaluate that, it'll give me the Unix time number for today. Remember before I was talking about Unix time. So you can see that the today function is returning the value in Unix time, but when I evaluate my column A, it's being returned in human time. So once again, I need to change this into Unix time so that that will match my condition. The way I'm going to do that is by wrapping a date function on my dates. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap a date function in here. And once again, I need to add the format in quotations. And in this case, I have the year first. Then I have the month. And then I have the day. I'm going to close my parentheses. And once I press enter, I should be able to already see that number. So in here, when I take a look at my date, it's returning all my numbers in Unix time. And every time there is a match with today's date, it's selecting the revenue and it's summing the entire column. How do I know that it's doing a sum? Because under properties, I have the aggregation method, and by default, it will always be a sum, but you can change it to be anything else that you want. So I'm going to keep it as a sum. And another thing I want to change here, I know this is my revenue. So why don't we change the formatting from just a number to currency? So once I have currency, I can see now that I've made so far today $154. So now that I have this number in here, it will only make sense that anything that I see in my gauge, it's always a currency and it is a dollar value. So let's go ahead and take a look at our target. For our target, I don't want to complicate things too much. So all I'm going to do for our target is just to come up with a number. So I know I normally make about $250 a day. So I'm going to go ahead and add that $250 to be my target. So once I've added that number, I'm going to press enter so that I can see my target in here, but I'm also going to go into properties and change that to currency. So now I have how much I'm making today so far. I have how much I'm hoping to make today because this is my target. So now in my minimum value, this again, we're going to make it to be currency. Minimum would be $0. For the maximum value, in this case, it would be really great if we make $300. So we're going to hard code it to 300 and we're going to change it in our properties to be, once again, currency. So there you have it. So let's make this a little bit bigger so that you can really appreciate this gauge. So this looks great and we can say that we're almost done. However, it looks a lot better when we can customize it even more and we can add some color to it so that it's a little bit more appealing and it's easier to see when we're looking at it. What we're going to be using is different ranges. So if I go into the gauge level again, on the right hand side, I can add ranges in here or I can add a range on the properties panel. So I'm going to go ahead and add the first range, which in this case, I wanted to go and to be, I'm going to make it in this case red. And what I'm going to be looking for is to have from my minimum value all the way to my current value to be red. So the star is going to be the minimum value, but instead of adding 0, in case the minimum value changes, I can add what we call a formula reference. If I add the exclamation mark in here, automatically I'm going to have the different components that I can choose from. And in this case, I'm going to use the minimum value. And for the end, I want it to be the current value. And because the current value, it's a formula, we want to make sure that we respect the results that I get in here. So I'm going to be using the results reference, which is the ampersand. And then I'm going to be selecting the current value. So when I select the current value, you're going to see that I get red all the way to the current value. As this number moves closer to my target, this number will keep the color. So let's add another range. So let's go ahead into the gauge and let's add another one. And this one is going to be maybe yellow because we're getting closer to our target. So the star is going to be, once again, we know it's going to be our current value. So I'm going to select the current value and the end is going to be my target value. So I'm going to go ahead and use my target value. And now it's yellow all the way to my target value. The last piece is going to be hopefully money that I'm going to make on top of my target. So why don't we go ahead and we add our last range and it's going to be green. And when I take a look at it, it's going to be the star for this is going to be, once again, my target value. And the end is going to be my maximum value. And when I press enter, I can see now that it's green. And there you have it. So this is how we complete a gauge using different colors. And we did it all by using formulas. The last thing I want to show you, it's the way that we can take a look at this gauge. So if I go into the gauge, I can also take a look and have it vertical if I really want to. I can make it to be an arc, a semicircle, or a circle. Circle is my favorite, so I'm going to be using a circle today. I'm going to keep it that way. Maybe I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, so maybe we'll make it large. And now we're going to save it. And we're going to be using the same name that we use for our clip, which is going to be sales today. And now that it's saved, it's going to save at the top of my dashboard as the last clip that we're going to be building today. There you have it. So now I have my Sales Today clip, bringing data that is from Salesforce, completely dynamic. I have my units by state using Google Drive, and then I have my day picker using Google Analytics, also dynamic. So when the team, if I choose anything that is past today, I might not be able to see it on my graph because that data hasn't been populated. So there you have it. So those are 3 very simple clips using filters, using formulas, and we also use different components. So now you're probably wondering, but what's next? How do I now get the help that I need in order to accomplish this? So we do recommend you to go to our Klipfolio Help Center. You can go there by typing support.klipfolio.com on your browser, and it'll bring you to our help center where you have amazing resources to really get the most out of the platform. So 3 things that I like to point out every time I'm visiting this website. 1, at the very bottom, you're going to see this little like red ribbon. And if you click on it, you're going to be able to see our live chat so that you can talk to live agents in the office that will ready to answer any of your questions that you have. Second, we have a search engine built in. So you can say, I remember Exequiel mentioning the select function. If I start typing select, you can see some videos, some tutorials, some examples on how that select function works. And then the last one, it's the submission of tickets. So if I click submit ticket, you can submit a ticket to us and let us know what you're struggling with and some of the challenges that you're facing. And again, if you still want more and you're like, oh, I'm just new to Klipfolio, I still want to learn, we do offer demo calls. So you can always join us on a demo call, which would be a one-to-one, and we can help you out. And if you're currently a customer with Klipfolio, you can take advantage of your onboarding call, which will allow you to give you some personal time with your account rep, and they will be able to answer any questions that you might have. So once again, thank you very much for joining me on this Building in Klipfolio workshop. Feel free to join any of the other workshops that we have going on every week. Thank you and happy dashboarding.